People are suffocating today. We have no room to breathe under inflation and impossible housing prices, and declining opportunity, and debt, and surveillance, and credentialism, and under a constant sense that we are no longer in control of our own lives. I keep my Canadian surf video pinned to the top of my profile because it's important to always remember something that modern political discourse tries very hard to obscure: the truth that we are nowhere near free. And despite what communists stuck repeating Soviet era propaganda say, people in the West aren't living under capitalism. People will tell you, well, you can still make your own choices and own property and start a business, but take an honest look at the society we live in. Are we really living in a social order shaped primarily by the trades of private people who actually control property? Or are we living in a politically managed system where almost every major aspect of both economic and social life is monitored, licensed, subsidized, regulated, or otherwise administratively controlled? I've used language before like the political layer to describe government intervention being imposed on top of the market. And there's truth in that framing in the sense that coercion distorts allocation, but the logic of voluntary exchange never fundamentally breaks. However, it's important to understand how deep political integration has become. Investment in a place like Canada is directed heavily by public policy long before markets even begin trying to coordinate resources naturally, and that's after investment has already been distorted by artificially suppressed interest rates. What we call private property increasingly resembles vestigial management privileges. Yes, technically you can own things on paper, but can you really use them freely? When you look at it like that, you realize the public sector versus private sector distinction has limited use. Where are the private businesses that operate without a focus on subsidies, regulatory structures, licensing systems, state contracts, or lobbying? Where are markets still fully directed by consumers? People constantly talk about feeling exhausted, trapped, isolated, atomized, and anxious. And I think a huge part of that comes from the fact that we no longer have autonomous social spaces. Everything is mediated, everything is monitored, and progressives think that the solution is more public ownership, with no concern for privacy or freedom. Even apps meant for privacy, like WhatsApp, are widely understood to be insecure from government. Your savings are constantly eroded by inflation, while Keynesians and MMTers insist that monetary debasement is somehow economic management. And this matters because if we misunderstand the system, we will misunderstand how to advance freedom. If you think you are mostly free already, then you'll think all you need to do is lift government programs off an otherwise functioning society. But societies become administratively integrated, and so the problem is much deeper. In my model of government, there are two pillars built on a foundation of violence which hold the state up: dependence and legitimacy. And today, dependence remains extremely high, even where legitimacy has collapsed. People may hate the government, they may distrust institutions, they may know the system is corrupt, but they still cannot imagine life outside it because every major function of social and economic life has become tied into centralized structures. That's why libertarian strategy under the tyranny of the so-called mixed economy simply can't be about elections or policy reform. It has to be about rebuilding independent social capacity. You need to think like someone who is nowhere near free, like the rebel broadcaster, the cypherpunk, or the smuggler, to really break out of politics. I'm saying we ought to have the same focus we would if we were working underground in the USSR. Why? Because today we're also stuck under a totalitarian regime. The reason early internet and crypto were so exciting was not because of financial speculation, but because they seemed capable of creating autonomous spaces outside centralized control. For a moment, it looked like everyone could become a broadcaster. Communities could form independently, and black and gray markets could bypass institutional gatekeepers entirely. A freer society cannot emerge purely through political rhetoric. It requires parallel institutions. It requires counter-economics. It requires rebuilding the practical ability for people to cooperate voluntarily outside centralized administration. That means people being able to get goods and services which they otherwise would have to get from regulated industries. It means people being hired to do things without licenses. It means homeschooling networks that remove education from centralized ideological management and returns it to families and communities. It means local currencies and crypto-based commerce which reduce dependence on inflationary state monetary systems and politically controlled banking infrastructure. It means decentralized publishing and encrypted communication systems that allow people to speak, organize, and share information without relying entirely on centralized platforms vulnerable to censorship and political pressure. It means parallel arbitration and private reputation systems that rebuild trust and offer dispute resolution through voluntary association rather than bureaucratic monopoly. It means subscription communities and independent creator economies that allow people to support one another directly instead of filtering all cultural production through institutional gatekeepers and advertisers. It means decentralized infrastructure, like mesh networks and mutual aid associations, that restore local resilience and voluntary cooperation instead of forcing every aspect of life through centralized administrative systems. Not because these things instantly abolish the state, but because they rebuild the independent social space necessary for people to recognize that government is not synonymous with society, and that when they lose faith in political authority, like they are now, they still have real alternatives.